Hello, Jen Gerson.
Why,
Here we are.
hello, Matt Gurney.
An abbreviated week here. The long weekend on Monday threw me off all week. All week, I was like, what day is it? What day is it? But today, Friday, when we're recording this, was Telford Day. The Prime
Over
Minister's
day.
Chief of Staff testifying before Parliament on the China interference. I have not seen the coverage. You saw the coverage. Once I knew that you were watching the coverage, I felt better because I had to be in a meeting for an hour and a half this afternoon. So I'll just throw it to you. What happened today?
Yeah, a whole lot of nothing. Essentially, this is what I found so bizarre about after watching 2 hours of her testimony. I was just baffled that the Liberals spent so much capital and time filibustering and trying to avoid that testimony because essentially she came on. I mean, Telford's very smart. She's very capable. She's very capable of evading direct questions, and she was able to hide behind the fig leaf of, well, I can't disclose that because it's covered. It's a national security issue. So, like, if you were looking for actual revelations on the China interference story, the only revelations are that came from the omission, from fairly tiny omissions and exchanges about what wasn't said, which tells us a lot. So, one of the things that Telford consistently relied on was this idea that the original Sam Cooper Global story about Chinese interference was inaccurate. But then she wouldn't tell us what was inaccurate. And I'm like, okay, we're not denying that there was a CSIS briefing. Nobody seems to be denying that. But there seems to be some dispute about what was in that briefing. And finally, Luc Berthold, who's a conservative CPC from Quebec, started to list out it like, was this inaccurate? Was this inaccurate? Was this inaccurate? And the only thing that I can really tell seems to be in serious dispute is whether or not 11 liberal MPs received funding from China, or whether or not what was actually in that briefing was something to the effect of China is concerned about the connections that 11 MPs have. Like, it's not that those 11 MPs are themselves or themselves compromised, but there are 11 MPs that might or might not have connections that is worrying to the intelligence service. That was what was in that actual intelligence briefing. The issue of funding or clandestine funding being sent to these networks is a bit of a separate issue. So that seems to be where the initial questions about the accuracy of the reporting come in. And I've said this before. There's just as part of the investigative process, yes, there are going to be mistakes that get made. That's normal because, of course, you're trying to dig out secret information using anonymous sources, and you're doing the best you can. So it does not surprise me that there would be inaccuracies or mistakes in especially in some of the early initial reporting. It's also very, very normal for the subject of those reports to say, well, they got this wrong, so therefore the whole gist of the reporting is wrong, even when it's not. I mean, this is the she was 19 defense. I will make no further comment on that. So that seems to be the issue, but the general overall gist of the reporting doesn't seem to be in dispute, and yet we have Telford up there basically saying, well, I can't say who got what briefing about what when because of national security, even though, as far as I can tell, I mean, none of this should be considered a national security issue at this point anymore. I mean, with the exception of maybe sources or particular techniques, there's no reason for all of this not to essentially be public information at this point. So that's really my takeaway from all of this. It wasn't that Telford herself was a particularly interesting bombshell. She was very clever, very evasive. She managed to circumvent direct questions very effectively. But my takeaway from all of this is, what exactly are we covering under the rubric of national security that should more properly be considered national interest? Like, are we covering stuff that actually should be public, but we don't want public because it might be embarrassing to us? Or we don't want public because it might make things difficult for our diplomats to reestablish a relationship with China? That's not national security. That's just national interest. There's a really important difference there. But I suspect what maybe is happening here is that the government and perhaps even intelligence services are falling back into this reflexive secrecy, which makes them not want to disclose stuff, even when bluntly it's overwhelmingly within the public interest to disclose. It is overwhelmingly within the public interest to disclose now what Global got right and what Global got wrong. Like, at this point, the jig is up.
Yep.
Like, it's been revealed. So if the global got something wrong, then come right out and be like, this is what they got right. This is what they got wrong. Let's move forward.
Yeah, and the and
You
the
know?
the, the crazy thing about all of this is that liberals aplenty are cheering on Han Dong and his lawsuit, which we've talked about in previous dispatches we've done here. Telford could have given him a big boost today by being even the slightest bit specific about any of this.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you a question, and then I want to offer a kind of an off-axis comment on this. How did the conservatives do in questioning? What was your impression of that? And I'm asking that for a very specific reason, but I don't want to tell you yet. So I'll just put the question to you. How were the conservatives on offense?
Um, Mixed. I would say Rachel Blaney was very good from the NDP. She started asking about, inquiry. Why not just go for an inquiry, get this all out into the air? I thought that Luke Berthold was very good because he started to actually thoroughly break down what the allegations were and ask Telford, did you consider this inaccurate? Did you consider this inaccurate? Did you consider? He was trying to actually narrow things down. I thought Rachel Thomas wasn't so good at questioning, but near the end of the testimony, she had a really fiery 3-minute summation of everything that had happened at committee, which you could tell was done just for clips, but was very effectively done. And clearly, Telford was pissed, and the Liberal chair looked, sick. So I thought that was very effective. But I mean, the problem with these sorts of committees is that nothing, I mean, we can talk about the damage that allegations of foreign interference have on our democracy. Personally, I think nothing is more damaging to my faith in democracy than watching House of Commons committee meetings. And I'm quite serious about this because bluntly, there's nothing that I find grosser than watching Liberal MPs give handies to witnesses when they should be putting forward useful questions. And there's nothing more pointless about this whole exercise than watching opposition MPs, reduce what should be a productive and fruitful questioning to a search for clips, right?
Yeah.
And so much of this is it's impossible to watch these committee sessions and come away feeling like intelligent people are dealing with these issues in good faith.
Well,
You can't watch or be a part of a committee meeting and think that.
well, what's my meta theory, right? I mean, I've been telling you for a while, right, that we've memeified our whole politics. So the entire process is skewed to serve up social media content, and it forces people to act and behave in certain ways because they're not necessarily there for the answer. They're there to ask the sharply worded question, which will then be used in 1,000 Facebook campaigns.
Well, and not only that, but then it leaves the public with no recourse than the public inquiry. You know what I mean? Like that's the problem, is that if the system is working appropriately, even your Liberal MPs aren't trained SEALs. They're trying to actually get to the bottom of an issue and understand it. So they're asking valid questions, not pre-scripted nonsense that's just intended to eat up time and throw your witness a rope, which is all they were good for there. I mean, literally, you could turn off the screen the second any Liberal started talking. It was a waste of time. And in that kind of a system, you could have more faith that appropriate accountability measures were being put in place. But when you watch Liberals engage in this theater, where they're not actually willing to question someone whom I think they perceive to be their boss, even though she's not, that undermines your faith that any kind of accountability measure is working within Parliament. And that leaves you with only one recourse, and that is independent investigation or independent inquiry that supersedes the ordinary parliamentary processes.
Yeah, but we won't get one because the only reason we got POEC was because the Emergencies Act specified it.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever we get will be whatever the Liberals decide is the biggest bone they're willing to toss us here. I'm with you. It's depressing to watch this stuff, and I know it sounds like a broken record here, but everything you're describing, Jen, can be summed up in a short, pithy phrase. Canada's
Apparently, it's wrong for us to use. Apparently,
I want to, I'm sorry I didn't get to watch it today. It was a meeting that came up, and I just had to take it. And I was really curious to watch it because In preparation for this, I went back and I watched some of the Telford testimony last time,
Mhm.
and I also read what had been written, including what I had written back last time. And everything you're describing to me checks out. Like, it was what I was expecting if I'd been able to watch it.
No, Telford's got a few IQ points ahead of anyone questioning her. That's beyond dispute.
When I was reviewing the testimony from last time, and when I was reviewing what was written last time, including what I wrote last time, I found myself getting pissed off again about last time. So last time was when, again, Global News, Mercedes Stevenson and Amanda Connolly, God bless them in particular, had been publishing a series of devastating reports about the then chief of the defense staff, the highest ranked military officer in Canada, General Jonathan Vance. And I won't belabor this with all the details, but what happened, what Global alleged, was that the general had been involved in a sexual relationship with a subordinate female officer, which is bad, but then also had applied inappropriate personal and possibly professional pressure. I wasn't clear on that, to that woman, to shut her up, because he was on the fast track to the big job and didn't need complications. And this was obviously inappropriate. Ultimately, it was found to be illegal. He was criminally charged and he pled guilty. So normally I would have to buttress this in all kinds of allegedlys and was reported. This was a criminal matter and he pled guilty in court for this. The reason this became a political issue is because the woman, the young, the female military officer, had gone to the armed forces ombudsperson and basically filed a complaint. Because when you're in the military and the boss is hitting on you or sleeping with you or applying inappropriate pressure, it's not just a workplace imbalance, and that's bad enough. The guy's in your chain of command. He can order you to go jump on a grenade, in theory. That doesn't come up a lot in the Canadian Armed Forces. But so we have the ombudsperson who exists in part to give members who are lower ranked in the chain of command, lower ranked officers or service personnel, who can go outside their chain of command to report misconduct, criminal or professional. And what ended up happening is that the ombudsperson raised it with the Minister of National Defense. The Minister of National Defense kicked it over to PMO. PMO kicked it over to the Privy Council office, and no one did anything about it. So the substance of the real controversy there, and tell me this does not sound familiar about how the PMO has been defending itself this time. The substance was, oh yeah, we knew something was up, but we didn't know the exact shape of it. And when I was reading the coverage from 2 years ago about this, I was getting angry because you and I have said before that this all has echoes of SNC Lavalin, right? Oh, the story in the Globe and Mail is false. Go reread some of the 2021 stories about the General Vance stuff. Holy shit. You want to find echoes? So, for one thing, as I described it in 2021, there was a case of crippling incuriosity in the PMO, which is, oh, wow, terrible things are being alleged that have matters of national importance. No, we weren't briefed on that. No, we didn't really know anything about that. Like, it wasn't plausible then, and it's not plausible now.
Well, the
The,
thing, can I sort of preempt that with a potential defense of the Liberal government here?
let me just
Okay.
finish the
Yeah,
point
finish
first,
your
because I
thing. Yeah,
think
yeah.
this is germane to this. In 2021, they lied, and we know that they lied because Global News got the documents. So the whole defense of, oh, we knew there'd been an allegation, but like, we didn't know what it was. Global News got the internal communications for PMO and senior PCO staff, I think, and they were referring in their internal emails to sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, I think is the term they were using, allegations. So the whole line of defense of, well, we knew there was something, but we didn't know what it was. They were sending emails back and forth about it. Maybe a decision was made by someone in PMO to isolate that information. Like, it's plausible to me it did not go to the prime minister. It should have, but it's plausible to me that someone decided that the boss would be better off not knowing that. I have a harder time believing that would be true of Telford. And I want to let you take this over now because you said you wanted to make a defense here. Everything they say in 2023, to me, has to be weighed in the balance with the fact that in 2021 they lied. And the insane thing was, in 2021, they continued lying about this, even after Global had already published the documents. So it was like, well, yeah, we know what Global says, but if we just say this often enough, people might believe it. Anything they have
Well,
to say now, I just don't believe.
to that point, Telford was emphatic and repeated this several times during her testimony that she does not keep things from the prime minister. So this whole idea that she's going to throw herself as in front of the bus and understand information, but essentially refrain from reporting that information to the PMO or the prime minister as part of some kind of an ass covering exercise. She said emphatically, no, I do not keep information from the prime minister. He gets everything. So read that into the Vance situation, what you will. The preemptive defense that I might be able to give the liberals here is that when a lot of the Chinese interference stuff was really heating up, we had COVID. It doesn't, and in I'm trying to say, in an increasingly centralized party apparatus where essentially we know that there are huge bottlenecks for decision making and that there are fewer and fewer people in the prime minister's office who are authorized to deal with essentially more and more things. This is a for all of the criticisms that Harper got for centralizing his prime minister's office, we know
Trudeau's much worse.
Trudeau is much worse. To the extent that ministers can't make decisions, ministerial responsibility has essentially crumbled. All the decisions get made by like 4 people in the prime minister's office, if that, and everything goes through Telford.
Well,
almost everything goes through Telford.
Yeah, we've talked about this.
So,
this is one of the reasons I think they have. I've noticed that they've always been on like a 2-week lag between reality and decision.
yes,
but it's getting worse
yes,
because
it's
there's
getting
fewer
worse.
of them doing
There's
more,
fewer
and
of them
they're tired.
doing more and more thing, and they're more and more tired. And you're part of also the reason why the whole government is becoming more and more blinkered and divisive and partisan is the result that they just haven't brought in new blood. Like there's no new staff, and they don't, and there seems to be an almost paranoid vibe from Trudeau that he doesn't want to delegate to people he hasn't known since college.
He is trust.
Like this is, yeah, he does not trust. He has trust issues. He has major trust issues. And so as a result of that, there just aren't the staff on board to handle all the balls in the air. And I suspect what may have just happened is that I hold to my suspicion that a lot of what happened here is turning a blind eye because there was an effort to try and rebuild the diplomatic relationship with China, followed by we have COVID. We have too much other shit in the air. They just kind of lost track of the ball here. And
I find all that plausible.
I find that super plausible. I mean, that still leaves the issue of what happened in the Winnipeg lab very much outstanding for me. I don't know if we'll ever get answers on that, but
oh yeah, I mean, here's the thing.
I don't think you need to go fully down the conspiracy rabbit hole to understand why I think liberals just maybe screwed up because they got overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I mean, I'm more cynical than you are when it comes. I think that I have no doubt these guys would lie through their teeth and never really even break a sweat about doing that because they've done it before. These guys they lie, and they lie through their teeth, and they lie to the public whenever,
and they lie about stuff that's verifiable.
Yeah.
That's exactly really wild. Like the $6,000 a night hotel room stuff that came out last week, I think it was. Like
they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt.
No, they don't.
But in a meta sense, I do think what you're saying makes sense. I think these guys are willing to do shitty things, but I don't think that's their default. But I think your explanation probably fits. I think honestly it does to an extent. But one of the interesting things that one of my partisan conservative buddies said to me, he says, you have to understand that what's probably happening here is two different things at the same time. One of them is deliberate shittiness in pursuit of electoral gains. And then the other is genuine incompetence at responding to the problems that causes. And it might not be the same people. Like it might be like one group of liberals basically being like, hey, fuck them, like let's be aggressive on this. And then meanwhile, another group of liberals, when that like inevitably blows up, another group of liberals are echo chambery, bunker mentality, exhausted, bottlenecks in decision making. So on the outside, what can't be easily understood might actually be two different but separate government fuck ups unfolding at the same time.
The other thing that is happening concurrent to all this, of course, is what's happening with the Trudeau Foundation, Trudeau Foundation board resigns en masse after announcing
Yeah.
a big oh hi, and after announcing a big investigation. Sweetheart, mommy's talking on the phone right now. Can you give me a few more minutes to chat? I'll be right down. No. Okay, can you go downstairs, please? Yes, you're very cute.
She is very cute.
Elizabeth, downstairs, please. Yes, you can take that paper. Go downstairs.
They always just need to get something. They need to win. So if she got your paper,
yeah,
she's winning.
She's won. The other thing, okay, so then the Trudeau announces that they were going to request this dodgy Chinese the Globe and Mail reported that the dodgy Chinese
donation
yeah,
it was
unrefundable because the whole thing was so untraceable. And then also
accounting. There's no accounting behind it.
No accounting behind it. And then to make things worse, there was like a request to change the name for the tax receipt like twice. And they were like, yeah, sure, we'll just put whatever name you want on that. That's no problem. And then the board, amidst all of this, resigns en masse because they're just like, we have no trust in your ability to actually account for any of this stuff.
Well, see, the board was a mix of people who've come on since and people who were there before, and all the newbies said, fuck y'all. They bailed.
Fuck y'all. Yeah. So then, and then of course you start adding to this. Okay, so then there's a mass resignation. Then they ask the Auditor General to audit their stuff, which is just really bizarre. Because and then we discover that it's because for some bizarre reason this charity is actually a federal institution.
Yeah.
Which
I wonder if I can ask the Auditor General to come in and like take care of my taxes for me.
No, but I mean, like this. So apparently, this charity, this supposedly nonpartisan independent charity, is also a government institution. For reasons
I don't understand I don't understand any of that.
We know it was initially endowed under Chrétien, so it got its initial $120 million from taxpayer funds. But like, why is this charity like a federal like that? Doesn't okay. And then of course, then it comes out in the press that when the dodgy Chinese donation came down, that I think the director of the Trudeau Foundation was emailing the Prime Minister's issues management director about it. Which, what? Like, aren't these supposed to be separate entities? Like, this shouldn't, what's happening here? It's so weird and dodgy.
The Laurentian blob.
Yeah, I know. It's the Laurentian blob.
The separation between these things is not as good as it should be. And it was funny because the announcement of all the resignations was early Tuesday. So it was the first fully back to work day after a long weekend. And like immediately it's a bunch of people heading to the escape pods. I didn't know what was coming, but I just laughed. I was like, oh, okay. So something's coming. Some reporter just sent a list of very specific questions and whole bunch of people at the board just said we're out. Like that's like we're
into
gone.
The sea. And then of course the logic comes out with another story about them today on Friday that says that they aren't even spending the amount that they need to be spending to register as a charity. What is this organization and why does it exist?
Laurentian elites. It's all it's a social club.
It's a
it's a federally endowed and capitalized and apparently supervised social club.
Like for liberals, for shitting out liberals, I guess. I don't. Huh? I'm just confused. I'm mostly just very confused by this thing's existence. I'm not gonna lie.
Should you do a Q&A next week with someone who could maybe explain this?
Yes, that's
just like idea. Straight up, what the fuck is this thing?
What is this thing?
Okay. Anything else on this stuff?
No, that's all I got.
The one thing I will add, and we don't need to belabor this because your kids look like they're about to start riding. Pierre Poilievre had that letter this week to David Johnston. Did you see that?
Yeah. This sort of snarky,
terse, and all the predictable Twitterati are just completely outraged by this. I don't like Poilievre's style. I don't like his tone. I have better manners. I am more waspy genteel than he often is, but I think what he's doing is working. Yep. I still think there is a significant segment of the Canadian chattering class, at least, that cannot understand that what Donald Trump did in 2016 worked, and that what Pierre Poilievre is doing now might work. And before I get a bunch of outraged people saying, Gurney says Poilievre is like Trump. No, he's not. They're very different guys. But the strategy of direct confrontation that you and I have written about before, and we wrote about this in the context of the media, where the conservatives are going to pick fights with the media, and the media is not going to understand it because they fundamentally don't realize how hated we are.
Yep.
And that's the missing piece in
They
their
still think of
understanding.
themselves as such heroes of their own
Arbiters of
stories.
truth and fairness and balance.
Yeah, that they don't understand that the public just fucking despises us.
And then there's going to be,
and also they don't understand that the public ought to despise us and ought to regard us with suspicion, because that's just what it is.
Yep. No, yeah, I think that's bang on. And then I would add to that, there is, I think people are like, but how could anyone speak ill of David Johnston, says someone who has not taken the pulse of the Canadian public lately.
Yeah.
And it's nothing against David Johnston. I got nothing bad to say about David Johnston, but like I'm not shocked at the idea that some conservative strategist was like, Poilievre versus white-haired, genteel, Laurentian academic might be a fight that we can win.
Who's also been connected to the Trudeau
Foundation.
Because of course he has.
So
and it's like a cottage neighbor to Trudeau, and their kids have spent time together.
Yeah, and there's still so many people out there who don't understand why Poilievre is doing this, and also don't understand why it can work. I want to pivot for a minute here to a story coming out of the United States. We're talking about all these issues of national security and national interest here in this country. I know you've been following the story of this intelligence leak in the United States. We don't need to get in all the details, because I actually don't think that's the most interesting part. But basically, for any listener or viewer who hasn't been following this closely, over the last couple of months, we don't even know, I don't think we know yet when it started, but very, very sensitive, highly classified U.S. Diplomatic, intelligence, and military documents have been popping up in different parts of the internet. Eventually, it got noticed. And once it got noticed, people were able to look backward and go, holy shit, there's a lot of this stuff. This stuff is really bad for the United States. It is revealing candid assessments of the war in Ukraine, which are not flattering to Ukraine. It is revealing the fact that, this shouldn't surprise anyone, but it always somehow does. The U.S. has been spying on some of its allies, keeping tabs of their internal politics.
No shit,
Sherlock. No shit. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, the U.S. is freaked out, and rightly so. Like, this is bad. And there was this incredible story, and I don't know if you read it a few days ago. It was in the Washington Post. The Washington Post basically was almost able to crack the story by interviewing a kid. Didn't identify the kid, had to get his parents' permission to interview him. But the story that the kid told, which was then confirmed by another kid, also not identified, was that there was a group of nerds, teenagers, children, minors, who hung out on Discord, which is sort of a social media app for where you create private groups.
Place my husband hangs out because he's a gaming nerd.
Yeah, and well, it's funny you mentioned that, because these were video game nerds. Minecraft, apparently, which is a game my son loves and that I've played occasionally with him, so I know a little bit about Minecraft, where they would basically hang out and they would talk about Minecraft, and they would also, as teenagers do, make terrible racist and anti-Semitic jokes, which is bad, but anyone who's ever met a teenage boy is not shocked by that. And then eventually one of the members of the group, someone who is one of the older members and sort of apparently something of the group den father, I guess, began posting classified military documents into the group and saying, hey guys, take a look at this. This is what's really happening in the world out there. Open your eyes, see what the government's really doing.
In order to gain clout with the teenagers.
Yeah, and that this went on and on and on for months. And then eventually someone else in the group began sharing these documents outside. And then in the way of the internet, they got passed on.
They're everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it took months for this to be noticed. But once it was noticed, they were everywhere. On Thursday, a 21-year-old member of the Air National Guard was arrested and seems to fit exactly the profile of the individual who was being referenced in this Washington Post report. I don't know if I have a conclusion. Like, I don't know if I have a thesis for any of this, but I was just fascinated reading this because, again, my son loves Minecraft. My son and his other 8-year-old buddies all play Minecraft. They hang out in message groups together, which we as parents can monitor so we can see what they're doing. But they're exchanging strategies and tips. They're playing in online worlds together, Minecraft, Roblox, things like that. And I'm just thinking, 10 years from now, one of these guys could suddenly just start dropping in classified information. It was just incredible to me to think that these 8-year-olds who hang out at my house and play road hockey in my driveway, this the next front in national security? It makes sense though, because the misfit is a known problem for counterterrorism or counter organized crime. Misfits are the guys who get radicalized by ISIS. Misfits are the guys who end up running drugs for gangs. Good kids, smart kids from good
And
families and
also,
good
misfits
neighborhoods.
often get recruited into the military to straighten up and fly right.
Yeah. And yeah. So basically, yeah, the military, police services, terror groups, organized crime, they're all full of misfits, kids who need something to belong to.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy had a Minecraft group, allegedly, and he also had access to top secret information. Again, I don't know if I have a thesis to wrap around this, but it's fascinating because to me at least it felt somewhat familiar.
Hmm.
It's just okay. So the newest front in national security, video game chat groups.
Well, also, I mean, this is where a lot of groups are hanging out and radicalizing now. A lot of the extreme stuff is happening
Yep.
on video game chat groups.
Yep. It is absolutely fascinating. It's
So interesting.
You want to talk
Speaking
about the
of,
CBC article?
yeah, but I want to talk about another culture war issue first.
All right, go for it.
Yeah, and that is I want to talk about Sam Smith. So if you are following the crazy social conservative trenches of the culture war, which I frequently do, you will notice that they are freaking out over Sam Smith, who was an artist who a couple of years ago he was a fairly well-dressed, thin, conservative-looking a person who would sing, nice pop songs. Like he was good, whatever. He had some good hits. And then he gained some weight and just came out as queerer than thou. And the music that he's producing now is things like Unholy, which has got a good beat. But his music videos are also very sexually overt. There are lots of sort of fetishistic imagery and also a lot of satanic imagery. And of course, this interests me because I'm writing a book on the Satanic Panic. Getting on writing that book, working on it. But anyway, and the imagery is really interesting because it's almost like South Park level Satanism. Like it's a highly flamboyant, highly characterized. Like we're talking pitchforks and red and sparkles here. And this is actually part of a theme here. Is that I think that also Little Nas did the same thing, where there's a co-option of satanic imagery into particularly gay music. I'm sure there's an academic thesis to be done about this because it's a very interesting phenomenon. But of course, you have a lot of these SoCon pundits who take this at face value. And for them, this is hitting all of their buttons, which is also kind of the point of using satanic imagery, right? And they're like, look, these people are literal Satanists. They're trying to corrupt your children, and it's getting fed into this whole reactionary counter narrative about the problems with grooming and these gay people and these drag queens and blah, 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 blah. I mean, you will know that, I have my own, should I say this, concerns with certain aspects of that. But there's, I think the realm of sane concern about sexualizing of kids and the completely insane, these people are literally worshiping Satan and they're trying to groom your children en masse. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's nuts. And what I find so interesting as someone who's writing a book on the Satanic Panic is the cyclical nature of the Satanic Panic. Like, this stuff always seems to come back. Also, satanic imagery in popular music is really not new. This absolutely hit its peak in the 70s and 80s when you had like Ozzy Osbourne and Metallica and all of these punk rock bands were overtly using satanic imagery as part of their craft, as part of their art. And what was so interesting about the stuff in the 80s is that there's actually a whole interesting book about this. There really was a mixture of people who were doing it seriously and were very interested in occultism and were actually, like, you could legitimately say, worshiping Satan, or at the very least calling into demonic spiritual entities, or thinking they were. And then there were the people who were probably just fakers. They were just using it for shock value, right? Like they were just being provocateurs. And when you compare that whole era of satanic pop culture to what Sam Smith is putting out, Sam Smith seems so fluffy and goddamn tame. You know, like the old rock was edgy and dangerous, and like it was meant to push the boundaries. Like they were out there.
Yeah, it's like
And Sam,
if an occultist was in a transporter accident with a My Little Pony.
yes, that's exactly what Sam Smith feels
Yeah.
like. It's like he's not a real Satanist. He's not a real occultist. He's engaging like little sparkly horns and a big sparkly stick, like, in order basically just to piss off the SoCons on the right. That's all he's doing. And part of what makes him threatening in any meaningful way, I guess, to these people is his use of queer imagery and queer music, and his upending of sexual boundaries. But like, what's interesting to me about all of this is that the satanic energy that is typically called upon is a subversive energy. It's an energy that is, or it's a figure that is meant to subvert the natural order of things. So when the 80s pop rock people were using it, it was a subversion of the established norm, which was predominantly Christian, which
Yeah.
was still fairly uptight. To engage in sex, drugs, and rock and roll was still a bit of a subversive thing. I think what's different in 2022 is that sex, drugs, and rock and roll aren't particularly subversive anymore, right? Like, for fuck's sakes, we're decriminalizing drugs, and normalizing drug use. Sex is now, and especially queer sex, is now so normalized that there's nothing to it anymore. So none of these energies are particularly subversive or revolutionary. In fact, the revolutionary, the counter-revolutionary, is in fact the reactionary narrative. It's the
Yeah.
return to Puritanism. So the use of this satanic imagery just loses all of its potency in 2023, and now it's just a big fluffy joke. Right? You can't actually take this seriously. And this is what I find so fascinating about the reactionary forces, the more socially conservative right-wing people, is the fact that they're so locked into their own counter narrative that they're actually taking any of this at face value. And I just find that so interesting. I don't know
Alice
if I'm
Cooper is
explaining it.
apparently a great golfer.
Yeah,
And
Ozzy
that's
Osbourne. Like,
yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Look, I don't
but interesting. David Bowie actually was an occultist, and he actually described these sorts of mind-bending rituals he used to do, and he actually went a little crazy as a result of it.
you have a
During that
specific
time.
interest
So,
in the occult side of this. I don't, but
mhm,
what I can tell you is that the broader pattern fits purely on the sexuality side of it as well. Some
mm,
friends of mine a few months ago became quite scandalized by a recent Sam Smith video, and I went and I watched it, having previously kind of heard his name. Like I couldn't have told you a thing about him. And I
mhm.
went and I watched the video, and it was overtly sexual,
Yes.
gay or trans as well. So it's like it was very in your face, literally in a couple of scenes, with its sexuality. But I just kind of looked at it and I'm like, yeah, but like 70 years ago, like Elvis gyrating his hips scandalized people. I'm old
Wet
enough.
ass pussy scandalized people,
Yeah.
and Cardi B scandalized people. Like,
Madonna in the 80s.
Madonna and the 80s
Like, and I
scandal.
remember that. Like, I remember being a little guy when that book she had, I think just called Sex, was something that was like talked about for months on all the news programs and talk shows. Because even as a kid, I was a nerd and I would watch those. And I've just kind of decided I'm never going to be one of the people who gives a shit about this. Because I think what these issues are, it's 5% on the puritanical fringe and 5% on the uh cutting edge artistic pushing all the boundaries fringes, and they're lofting mortar shells at each other, and
Mhm.
the rest of us is 90% are just under the trajectory of all these mortars.
Well, and isn't
And
that just the culture war summed up in a
yeah,
sentence? Yeah.
and occasionally, because of who you and I are and because of what we do, occasionally we have to be culture war combatants. But I don't, I like, I never seek it out. Occasionally it comes from me. Someone will occasionally tell me that there's something I'm not allowed to talk about. There's something I'm not allowed to have an opinion about. That there's an issue where I don't have the standing to speak about it. And I kind of go, yeah, okay. Well, fuck you. Like, I will assert my prerogative as a citizen in a liberal democracy to have opinions about stuff. But
No,
I try to avoid this.
no,
But no, what you're describing on the occult side, it makes perfect sense to me because it's exactly what it is on the sex side.
yeah, and
Has to
exactly,
get
and
more provocative all the
has to
time.
get more provocative all the time. Now, the other interesting thing in all of this is that not to be on the side of the Puritans, but I do think there is an interesting question about to what extent children really ought to be exposed to all this. I wouldn't be taking a young child to a Sam Smith show. I think that's a legitimate point. But there's another question, and this goes back to the column that you and I were talking about MILF Manor a little while ago. But like, okay, well, how low really is the culture going to go? How much further can we really push the ban? Like, what's left?
We will find new horrible things. Every generation will be scandalized anew. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm not going to worry about it.
Like what is going to scandalize you in 40 years? I mean, just open incest. Like, is that the next spot? Like, I'm so bored by all of this. Like,
yeah, which is why I don't worry about it, because I don't know what's going to scandalize me in 40 years, but I know something will. And I've got things to worry about between now and then. But you and I have talked a little bit about this. If something like the metaverse really takes off, we will invent entirely new forms of perversion.
Well, this is the theme. Altered Carbon. Did you ever see or read all the Altered Carbon series? This was like what would happen if all of your consciousness and memories could be stored in a little crystal in the back of your head, and your body was interchangeable. And the answer was like your whole concept of morality would over time of your society would just collapse, because the body would become so pointless and meaningless that the only value would be in your mind, what you could store. So
did you ever read Ready Player One?
No.
I would honestly recommend to you and any of our fans here, Ready Player One, the novel, is worth it. The movie was not. But Ready Player One, the novel, was interesting. I read the sequel as well. Yeah, it was okay. But if you want to kind of get a peek into what social etiquette and concepts of morality look like when our lives are largely lived virtually, it's interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm not quite sure what I say there, and maybe it just might be like, let's go back to the 80s, people. Like, this is
already. We have Ghostbusters movies.
Oh,
inflation,
I know. But I mean, maybe I mean, when it comes to the Sam Smith stuff, it just might be like this is the Satanic Panic, but like the goofy version. This is repeating history, but it's farce.
Star Trek: The Next Generation is back. Star Wars is back. Ghostbusters is back. Madonna's trying to be back. Fear of nuclear
Madonna,
annihilation.
I'm actually scandalized by, but that's a whole other issue.
Fear of nuclear annihilation is back. Inflation is back. Cold War tensions are back. The 80s are back.
80s are back, baby.
Not some of the good parts, because hey, TNG and Ghostbusters, I'm all for it. Do you want to call it here, or do you want to talk about that CBC article?
I think we should just call it here, because I think my food's arrived.
What'd you order?
Sushi. Jamie loves fish.
Interesting.
He's obsessed with sushi. We'll eat like 20 pieces. It's crazy.
Kind of the basic entry sushis. I can't.
Yeah, he just likes it's like salmon and the rice, just the salmon.
Wow.
And also the shrimp. He will eat 20 of those. It's crazy.
My son does like shrimp. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, but both my kids like shrimp, but fish, well, they like salmon because everybody likes salmon. But sushi, no, not for them.
Well, considering the only other food he likes are pizza and buttered bread, I will shove as much sushi down his throat as I possibly can.
Well, I'm with you. Wouldn't mind a little sushi myself. Okay, well, let's you go feed your family. I will go get this podcast live, and then we'll talk tomorrow about who's going to write what.
All right, cool.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a great night.